Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Bruchim Habayim. We are continuing on Masechet Rosh Hashanah, the second day of it, and we are on top of Bet Amud. Bet, some 5 lines down from the top of the Amud. Today's Amud has been sponsored Refuah Shlema of Daniela Bat Rachel, Manzal Bat Satanat Goltaj, sponsored by Dan Family. Also, the Refuah Shlema of Daniel Moshe ben Farangis Abraham, sponsored anonymously, Refuah Shlema of Rachel Simcha Bat Chaya, Refuah Shlema of Sarah Bat Mina by Taban family, and also has been sponsored Leilui Nishmat Shoshana Bat Yehuda by Tzaddik family, Leilui Nishmat Mordechai ben Jalal and Muhtaram Bat Mordechai by Barfordar family, and Leilui Nishmat Betzalel ben Rafael Vester by Mahbubi families. Today's Amud should also be for Refuah Shlema Yosef ben Farideh, that has a procedure that's coming up should go well. Be'ezrat Hashem, one of our own Chavra, that should have a complete, a successful surgery and a complete recovery. Be'ezrat Hashem, Amen. This month's learning of the community has been graciously dedicated by the Shea family and Mahbui family. It should be an ultimate schut for all the mishpachot. Amen. Okay, so we started the Masechta. We're going to have a run through very quickly. The Mishnah introduced that there are Arba'a Rashi Shanim. You think there's only one Rosh Hashanah, that's stressful enough. Really, there are Arba'a Rashi Shanim. There are 4 different days during the calendar year that are considered the head of the year, the beginning of the year, each one of them for its own halachic purposes. Be'echad b'Nisan, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which, by the way, according to everyone, according to all accounts, we count our Chodashim from Nisan. That's not debatable. That's not up for debate. The Torah says, HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodashim. So the Minyan HaChodashim, the count order of the months of the year, Hebrew year, according to everybody, starts from Nisan, right? So that makes Av the 5th Chodesh, Elul the 7th Chodesh, right? That for sure is true, as I will see. The Gemara uses that as a davar pashut, as a simple given fact that's not up for debate. But here, the Gemara says, Echad b'Nisan is Rosh Hashanah li'melachim. Every king that gets up, that is the Rosh Hashanah for them, which basically means if a king was nominated at the end of Chodesh Adar, let's say 29th of Adar, as the Gemara says, after one day of being king, he already is in the second year. Because once Adar finishes, Nisan comes, is the second year of his reign. And says the Mishnah, it's also for regalim. That means shalosh regalim, order of them is not Sukkot and Pesach. Doesn't work, because every cycle you could start, depending on where you start counting from, you could count. It's a cycle. It goes around and around. So where do you start the cycle of the regalim, of the holidays? You started always from Nisan. It's Pesach, then Shavuot, then Sukkot. We have it in order of the regalim. In Chumash also we have it like that. It says it that this is Rosh Hashanah regalim. The Gemara is going to discuss in Haftalit what halachic difference does that make? Because seemingly it's just the semantics of where you count from. Who cares where you count from, right? Says the Mishnah, it's Machloket Tanaim, Hanakama versus Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, where the Rosh Hashanah is for Maaser Bema, which also we mentioned, when you have new babies in your flock, you can't give Maaser from this year's babies on previous years or on next year's. It has to be within the same year. We mentioned how we do it. You get all the newborn baby animals and you count them every 10th. We'll mark them and it will be brought as a korban that the Baalim eat. Kohen gets a part and parts of it burn on the Mizbeach. And the bigger one, Be'echad B'Tishri, the Rosh Hashanah, aside from being Yom Adin, is also Rosh Hashanah, Shemitin V'Leyovelot, that the Shemitah year starts from the day of Chad B'Tishrei. until Erev Rosh Hashanah, you could go work your land and water and plow and do whatever you want. Hits Rosh Hashanah, Asur. Yovel, the same thing. Neti'ah, the same thing. That means, the Torah says the first 3 years of a plantation of a tree, you cannot, it's orla. Even in Chutz La'aretz, this is a big deal, right? You have to be careful. Those who love gardening and they go buy all kinds of fruit trees and plant it, if you're buying the actual tree, if you plant the seeds, fine. So it's easy to do the 3 years, right? If you actually have the tree, but you do it in the winter and there's no dirt on the roots, or not enough dirt on the roots that you can live in it, anyway, that resets the entire clock. I have to count 3 new years from that. But where does the year start? It's not 3 times 365 or 354 for that matter. It starts from Echad B'Tishrei. In other words, if I planted a tree, right, in Elul, once it hits Tishrei, already second year. Right? So that's important to know. Says the Mishnah. Also, for Yerakot. Yerakot means you can't give the Maaser from Yerek from this year to past year or vice versa. And the cutoff day, when you pick the fruit, is Rosh Hashanah Echad B'Tishrei, right? If you pick something before, you pick something after, you can mix and match those two bundles. Echad B'Shvat, and this also Machloket Bet Hillel Bet Shammai. Rosh Hashanah le'ilanot. Chag ha'Ilanot is it Tu B'Shvat? We know it as Tu B'Shvat because we paskin like Bet Hillel. Bet Shammai holds is Rosh Chodesh Shvat, not Tu B'Shvat. And again, the Gemara is going to discuss what exactly trumps Shvat. Shvat is like in the middle of nowhere, right? It's before really the season of spring. So exactly what happens on Echad B'Shvat or Tu B'Shvat, the Gemara is going to discuss. Again, for the next number of pages, we're going to go line by line through entire Mishnah, discussing every nook and cranny of the halachot that we come from here. So the Gemara started, and this is going to be today's and tomorrow's discussion of Rosh Hashanah leMelachim. Gemara said, who cares? LeMelachim, lemay hilchata. What's the halachic difference that Echad B'Nisan is Rosh Hashanah leMelachim? And the Gemara said, we always, from time immemorial, we have been respecting the king by mentioning the number of his malchut in every shtar that we have. In the halachic documentations of Jewish nation, we always mention the melech in order to give them kavod, to keep the peace. And we already mentioned something Gemara partially is going to say, even though that the source used here is from Masachet Gitin, which is talking about the Goyish kings, our Mishnah is talking about only Jewish kings. For the Goyim, Rosh Hashanah leMelachim, Malchei Umot HaOlam, is Chad B'Tishrei. So this is only Jewish kings, and still you have to have Shalom Bayit with them, right? There's no shortage of crazy Jewish kings in the history. If you go through the Sefer Melachim, and you see many of them, they were not tzaddikim, they were Reshaim. So therefore, it has been something always on the minds of Klal Yisrael. And the Gemara gives an example. The Gemara says, if a king becomes nominated, he sits on the throne on 29th of Adar, tomorrow, Echad B'Nisan, he's already in the second year. Now, the Gemara is going to bring 2 braitas, and that's why we're going back kind of to cover from yesterday. The Gemara is going to bring 2 braitas and explain them, and they seem to have an overlap. So we're going to read the braitas and explain them line by line. Says the Gemara, and this is, again, this is 6 lines up from the bottom of Bet Amud Aleph, so we're going to start from there and quickly read until where we covered yesterday. We learned in a Braita, Melech Shamad be'esrim ba'adar. This is actually the example we gave is the example, the exact example that the Braita gives. If a king was nominated, was started his malchut on the last day of Adar, 29th of Adar, once tomorrow comes, Rosh Chodesh Nisan comes, he already has finished his first year. This is the second. That was the first part of the Braita. The second part of the Braita is, but if he didn't become a king until the first day of Nisan, en monin lo shana ad sheyagia Nisan acher. Then his year is not up until a whole year later in Echad ben Nisan. It seems to be Pashut. You already told me that, right? So the Gemara is going to ask that question. Like the Gemara is going to deal with this question. This first part of the Braita that he just told me, that if he is nominated at the last day of Adar, after one day he's already by the second year, this is a simple teaching of two elements. Hamash Malani teaches us the Nisan Rosh Hashanah Lemlachim. It teaches me that Nisan is the Rosh Hashanah, not Tishrei. We start counting for Melachim in the beginning of Nisan, not in the beginning of Tishrei. That's one. B, Yom Echad B'Shana Chashiv Shana. That even one day could be considered a whole year. That this fellow only was a king for one day, and he's already the second year of his reign. Fine. Now the second part becomes more questionable. The second sentence of this Braita was Ve'im lo amad ela be'echad benisan, and if he didn't become a king, didn't stand to take the reign of the country until the first day of Nisan, en monin lo shana ad sheyagia Nisan acher. We're not going to finish counting his first year until next Nisan. We should. Of course, I know that. Once you tell me that we start the count from Nisan, I already know that if he started in Nisan, next year is going to be the end of his year. This is a no-brainer, the Gemara asks. So says the Gemara, correct. The chidush is, even if he was appointed, now we gave an example, Lavdil, of the elections in the United States, even though the elections was finished in November, and we know who the king, who the president is going to be. It's dangerous to say king now, but right, we know who is going to be the next president, but because the actual government is not in the hand of the president until mid-January, it's not going to be counted until January. So the Havdil is the same thing over here. That even though that you know who the king is going to be because they made the decision, the government is not going to be counted until when he actually takes the reign. And if that happened in Nisan, regardless of when he was appointed, still is going to be counted from Nisan. Fine. Now we would have thought maybe because he was nominated from beforehand, he was chosen rather, and decision was made from before, from Adar, we should count 2 years, Kamashman. So this is where we stopped yesterday. Now, the Gemara is going to bring a second Braita, Tanu Rabbanan, and we're going to do the same exact thing with the second Braita. Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in the Braita, Met Be'echad, Be'adar rather, Met Ba'adar ve'amad acher tachtav. If the previous king died in Adar, and the same month they already had in pipelines who's going to be the king, and they appointed the second king already in Adar. So, in Chodesh Adar, you had two kings, right? Adar started with King A and ended with King B. Says the Braita, Monin Shana Lazeh Velazeh. You could count it however you want. A star, you could either write is the 5th year of King A, or you could write the 1st year of King B. It's up to you. You could do whatever you want. Now, this is the end of the year. Already, the majority of the year was for King A. So we understand that, you started the Adar, which is the last month, with King A. You could write anything you want. Now, says the Braita, Met benisan v'amad acher tachtav benisan. If he died in Nisan, if the first king died in Nisan, which is the beginning of the year now, and in the same month, Nisan, they appointed the second king. Again, Monin Shana Lazeh Velazeh. It's up to the Sofer, up to the person that's writing the Shtar. You could choose 5th year of the previous year, whatever year it was, from the previous king, King A, or the 1st year of King B.
The whole point is to give kavod to the king.
So they've covered for both kings, yeah, as long as you're not scared of the second one, especially if that was his father, as we'll see in just a moment. It's a respect for him as well. So, but the third scenario in the Braita, Met ba'adar ve'amad acher tachtav benisan. If previous king died, this was very timely. He died at the end of the year in Adar, and the appointee, the next king, was not put up the throne until Nisan. So that would be simple, right? What would be? Monin Rishonal Rishon Veshaniya Sheni. This seems like a very, very simple. Why do you even have to say this? Gemara is going to ask that question. You count the first year up until the end of that year for the first one, and the second year would be for the second king, King B. So says the Gemara. Let's analyze this together. Amar Mor. Met the first line of this Braita, the Met Ba'adar v'Amad Acher Tachta Ba'adar, that both of them reigned in the last month of the year. Half of Adar was King A, half of Adar, the second half was King B. Monin Shana Lazeh Velazeh, that you could choose however you want to slice it. Chita, says the Gemara, that's Pashut. Why do you have to tell me they both are kings? No, the Gemara says, no, it's not so Pashut. Now the Tema, you would have thought, Chata lebetre lo maninan, that you can't divide it to two different peoples. Either this one is the king in this year, or that one is the king. You can't mess with the kings. You have two kings be king at the same time. So it teaches you that you can. In actuality, they both were kings in Adar, so you could do it. Says the Gemara, fine, I hear that. But next case, it becomes a problem. If the first one died in Nisan, which is now beginning of the count of the year, and the second one right away was appointed in the same Nisan, Monin Shana Lazeh, that you could count the year for both of them, that's for Shin Pashut. In the light of what you just said, you could choose whatever you want, even at the end of the year. So why you have to tell me the second case? What's the chidush of the second case? Says the Gemara, you would have thought you might have thought that the only time that we could count for both is when it was at the very end of the year. At the end of the year, this King A, poor guy, was king for a whole year. Now in Adar, the middle of the last year, he died. So far, you give him the whole year. So you could choose to count in his name. But the second scenario in which the first king died in the very beginning of the year, you might have thought that no, this is already like the whole year is going to be King B is the current Melech, so maybe you should not be able to count in the second scenario from the first king. The Gemara says no, so long as a person was a king even one day during the course of not fiscal but Jewish year of Melech, from Nisan to Nisan, even if he was a king for one day during that period, any sofer, any scribe could choose to count it for that king, regardless of who is king at this moment. Fine. Now let's deal with the third one. The third one was the most pashut. Met Ba'adar v'amad acher tachtav benisan. That if the first king, King A, died in Adar, and they didn't put up the next king until Nisan, so that's like a open and it should be an open and short case. It's pashut. Monin rishonal rishon, that you count the first year for the first king, the second year for the second king. The Gemara says pshita. That's really pashut. Why do you have to tell me that in the Braita? Listen to this. Lo sricha, says the Gemara. No, you need that too. The imnu aleh madar, that they decided to put him up as a king in Adar. When the first king died, they already had this guy in pipeline. He said he's going to be King B is going to be the next king. But that already we know from top of the Amud, right? Now that's now the Chiddush, right? But here is an additional case. In addition to the fact that he was decided already from Adar to be the next king, but he's also Melech ben Melechu. He's the son of the previous king. Right now, what difference does that make? So, in a simple understanding is that he's more expected to be the king. But really, there is, I believe there's a halachic thing embedded over here as well. The Gemara in Horayot, in Masechet Horayot Daf Yud Aleph, the Gemara says that when you appoint a new king, you have to have a halachic appointment, right? You have to nominate them and inaugurate, so to speak, the kingdom with Shemana Mishra. Right? They have to be Nimshach LeMelech. The case will happen with Shaul HaMelech and with David HaMelech. Shmuel HaNavi, the Navi would come with a horn full of Shemana Mishra, special shemen, and would pour it on their head. It was an official appointment, right? And until that moment, the David HaMelech did not have the Ruach HaGvura. For those who know the story of Shaul and David, Shaul HaMelech was actually, in practice, he was a king almost 7 years after Hashem put him away. He still was the one on throne. He still was the one with the with the Keter Malchut, with the thing. But he was actually chasing after David, but David was actually Melech. David was a fugitive, but really, in the eyes of Hashem, he was the king. And when did that start? When Shmuel HaNavi, hiddenly, it's a whole story in Masechet Pesachim Daf Chet of how this happened. He had to hide himself, basically, to go and nominate David as king. He said, if Shama Shaul v'Aragani, if Shaul hears that I'm going to Yishai, to put one of his king up as one of his sons as a king, he's going to kill me. And Hashem made a whole cover-up story for him. Go bring a korban, so on and so forth. But David HaMelech was a king. At that moment that he poured the Shemen HaMishcha on David's head, the Ruach HaKodesh was nistalek from Shaul, was given to David HaMelech. And Shaul, for the next almost 7 years, experienced depression. He had a horrible life he had. He was always in fear. It was because, again, he didn't have that Ruach HaMelech on him. Now, guess who doesn't need Shemen HaMishcha to become actually a king? A Melech ben Melech, right? A Melech ben Melech, so as long as he has no opposition. If he has opposition, and they have to make a decision on him, then he would need actually a new nomination with Shemen HaMishcha. But if the decision has been made, like we said over here, Nimnu alav ma'adar, from Adar already they decided, no, this is the best, right? The son of the king is actually going to be the next king. Because he is the son of the previous king, he doesn't even need the whole process of Shemen HaMishcha. And that really Allah. So I would have thought, in this case, for sure, you should count from Adar. And the Kamash Malan is that's the skiddush of the Braita, that even though that they decided he's going to be the king, and Melech ben Melech, still we don't count it until he actually takes responsibility for the country. Speaking about responsibility, okay, until you sit on that thing and you have the weight of Klal Yisrael on your shoulders, and you're making things happen for Klal Yisrael, you're no king, right? And you're not going to count your years, even though that you have it in the pipelines and you have all the boxes checked. Still, it's not going to start until you actually take responsibility for Klal Yisrael. Fine. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, do we even know that we count from Nisan? We've been discussing this whole detailed braitas, but where do you see that you count the kings from Nisan? So says Rabbi Yochanan, I'll tell you. Rabbi Yochanan, do we know that you don't count for melachim until Nisan, start from Nisan? Shenemar. It's a pasuk. It's a pasuk about the building of the first Beit HaMikdash by Shlomo HaMelech. We all know that David HaMelech was not allowed to build it. For 35 years, he amassed everything that he found: gold, silver, beautiful wood, copper, anything good that he found. He had a treasury that was miyuchad for the building of the Beit HaMikdash. Because if I can't make it, I'm going to do what I can do. I can put the thing together, the material. Then when my son Shlomo takes over, he's going to build it right away, right? Shlomo HaMelech became a king at the age 12, right? And it took him 4 years to actually count it, and this is the pasuk to build it, and this is the pasuk that talks about it. It was in 480th year. Latzet bnei Israel me'eretz Mitzrayim, from Exodus, from the day that they came out of Mitzrayim. Shana Harvi'it, in the 4th year. What's that? 4th year of Shlomo HaMelech. So pasuk is counting his years as well, right? The 4th year, b'chodesh Ziv. Hu HaChodesh HaSheni was the 2nd month. So you have Nisan, is ER, right? The Melech Shlomo al Israel, and the Gemara says this pasuk is abundantly clear that it's comparing the years of Yetziat Mitzrayim with the years of Melech Israel, the Shlomo Melech. So just like Yetziat Mitzrayim, you count from Nisan, you count Shlomo Melech's Malchut also from Nisan. And just like you count Shlomo Melech's kingdom from Nisan, every single king is going to be counted from Nisan. This sounds like a open shot, checkmate, easy right? You think so. Says the Gemara. Yetziat Mitzrayim Nisan, just like Yetziat Mitzrayim is from Nisan, it's Malchut Shlomo Nisan, right? Well, says, wait a second. Who says Yetziat Mitzrayim if you count from Nisan? This is like the ultimate Jewish question, right? What do you mean? Like, of course we count from Nisan. No, the question is like this. We all know that Yetziat Mitzrayim happened in Nisan, right? That's no question. The question of Gemara is, if the years always start from Tishrei, that we know, we count like, 58, 85, 57, 85, right? That is from Riyat HaOlam. If we count the number of years from Tishrei, maybe we should count Yetziat Mitzrayim also from Tishrei. And how does it work? We came out of Mitzrayim in Nisan, and 6 months later, when Tishrei hits, it should be already the second year out of Mitzrayim, right? So we have been saying by Melachim anyway. So who told you that it's from Nisan to Nisan 1 year? Maybe from Nisan to 6 months later, Tishrei is 1 year, and from Tishrei to Tishrei is the second year. Nobody has told me that yet. So it's a valid question. It's a legit question. Says the Gemara, how do we know that it's from Nisan? Says the Gemara like this. Maybe we should count it from Tishrei, and once Nisan to Tishrei 6 months passes, it should be already the second year. Gemara says, no. Don't ever think that. Why? It's a pasuk, right? Again, you have to understand. There's no law. The Torah does not work with just svarat keres, shooting from the hip. Everything has to be legitimately proven from the Torah. So if you're suggesting that we count Yetziat Mitzrayim from Nisan, you have to prove it. First, it's fine, no problem. I'll prove it to you. Steve, Vayada Aaron HaKohen Hor Hahar. In Bamidbar, we have the story of the death of Aaron HaKohen, who we know he died in Rosh Chodesh Av, right? Says the Gemara, it says it. Vayad Aaron HaKohen went up to Hor Hahar, Al Pi Hashem, based on the words of Hashem, Vayamot Sham, he died there. Listen to this. Not Ha'arba'im Lesed Bnei Yisrael Mitzrayim. It's the 40th year of Yetziat Mitzrayim, right? So this is a clue already. The Chodesh HaChamishi, what's Chodesh HaChamishi? That's not debatable. Av, right? Echad HaChodesh. You count from Nisan, Av is Chodesh HaChamishi. Echad HaChodesh, and Rosh Chodesh. So that's one pasuk. Uchtiv, and in Divarim it says, right? Ve'ashte asar chodesh, also 40 shana, ve'ashte asar chodesh, the 11th chodesh, ve'echad lachodesh. What month is that, by the way? Shvat. Ve'echad lachodesh, also Rosh Chodesh. So this is Rosh Chodesh Shvat of the 40th year. Diber Moshe, this is the beginning of Sefer Dvarim. Moshe starts the Mishneh Torah, the Sefer of Dvarim, right? Now, in Av, he's standing, you call it the 40th year. Then in Shvat, he's standing, and you call it the 40th year. If Rosh Hashanah, Tishrei, was the Rosh Hashanah Yetziat Mitzrayim, once you are 40 years after Yetziat Mitzrayim in Av, Rosh Chodesh Av, once you go 2 months, Av Elul Tishrei should become already 41st. And yet you're by Shvat, and you're still calling it the 40th year. Right? That's a checkmate of what would have been, right? Until you learn the next line, obviously, right? But that would be, it's in Bamidbar. You're reading the Torah, right? You go from Bamidbar, it says, Aaron HaKohen died, 40th year, Shvat, Av. And then you go to Dvarim, 40th year, Shvat. So you passed a Tishrei, and it's still 40th year. That sounds like a very solid, airtight raya that it's not from Tishrei, it's from Nisan. It's a very solid raya. Says the Gemara, Midekai be'Av, it's standing in Av, and he calls it the 40th year. V'kari la shenat arba'im. V'kai b'Shvat, and then Number of months later, in Shvat, he still calls it Shinat Arbaim. Rosh Hashanah Lav Tishrei. You see from here that Rosh Hashanah is not Tishrei, is Nisan. I said, okay, I have a bunch of problems with this. Actually, we're out of time. That Gemara is going to ask two different lines of questions on this, and come back to proving this as the halacha, which Bezat Hashem we will pick up in the next shiur.